I think I'm going to start. In this talk, I'm going to introduce several improvements that we have introduced to the DragonFlyBSD network stack in the past year. Here is the performance evaluation network. This is for the HTTP 1.1 performance evaluation. It uses very short connections, one HTTP request per connection. So this is basically the worst case of the HTTP workload. We do the benchmark with 2 clients and 1 server. It's mainly because 1 client does not have enough power to saturate the server, so we will have to use 2 clients. And here is the configuration for the network forwarding performance testing. It's a dual direction forwarding, because I don't think single direction forwarding actually make any sense here. In full screen mode, you only see approximate half of it. So I failed to adjust this screen. Sorry. Here are some configuration. We mainly bump the number of the N bus available to the system. That's the main parameter. The rest is for the power saving. The auto CX and wait CX idle is for the power saving. If your system is relatively idle, this will save you a lot of power. And for the performance evaluation, only the packet sent by the forwarder is counted. We don't count input packets. And here is the first item. We try to use all available CPUs for the network processing. So before this was fixed, on DragonFly we only can use power of 2 CPUs. The main issue here is that if we only use power of 2 network CPUs on a system with 24 CPUs, which is quite common nowadays, only 16 CPUs can be used. It is pretty bad for the forwarding and the bridging application because everything runs in the kernel. So you will only see the first 16 CPUs are busy. The rest of the CPUs are definitely completely idle. And for the performance and the latency of the network-heavy user-land application, we cannot do any further optimization with only power of 2 network CPUs. And the last item is, as I just said, the 6, 10, 12, and 40 cores per CPU package is become quite common these days. So we will have to make all CPUs doing the network processing. Here is the testing we have done before our work. The configuration B with the 32 NGX workers and without affinity. And if we are going to do with affinity, then we can only use 16 NGX workers. And as you can see, though the configuration A.16 has better latency, but the performance is relatively low. It's kind of like 10% drop in the performance. But if for the configuration B, the performance is high. But as you can see, the 99th percentile latency is extremely high. It's too high, actually. Though the average is quite similar. So the first step is on DragonFly, we will need a host hash to be calculated. This is pretty simple. We just got the RSS hash and got an end with 126 and then modulo the number of CPUs. But can we simply just do that on the NIC redirect table setup? For example, if you have 16 rings and you just populate the redirect table with the 16 rings, the question is actually no. Here is the example. On a 24 CPU system, if your NIC only have 16 RX rings, then here is the view of the host. We don't have any shades here because this is the right view. And if you just populate the redirect table with the table I equal I modulo number of rings, then you got 32 mismatch in the first 48 entries. But if you do it in a very different way, you try to find the grid of the redirect table first. In this example, it's 24. Then you populate the first entries with number of rings and patch the rest of the entries. In the first 48 entries, you only got 16 mismatches. That means you save great amounts of IPIs if you try to dispatch the packet to different CPU to run. So here is the final performance evaluation after we have fixed the redirect table settings and we utilize all of the CPUs for the network processing. We name it configure A.24. Well, look at here. For the performance level, we only got less than 2.5% drop. But for the latency, the 99th percentile latency is dropped drastically here. But for the average, it actually increased a little bit. We will address these situations, the performance drop and the average latency increasement in a later item. But as of this work, we can observe a very stable latency. So the 99th percentile latency is almost the same as the average latency. Performance is quite reasonable because it only drops 2.5%. And here's the performance increasement for the network forwarding. We got fast forwarding. It's increased from 11 mega packets per second to almost 12 mega packets per second. And for a normal forwarding, we increased from 9.5 mega packets per second to more than around 10 mega packets per second. Actually, for the forwarding, we have another item to fix because this actually does not get what we want. But you will have to use all available CPUs for the further movement on the performance side. We actually, to ease the driver side, we actually develop a set of APIs. We call it iframe maps for the driver to use. So we do not duplicate all the code across all drivers. The first set of API tries to allocate a ring map. That's what I have described here. It's the last one with these settings. And there are several APIs that is going to use it to meet the special requirements. For example, the VC from the Broadcom network NIC and the VNX is also come from the Broadcom. And for some network NIC that don't have a very strict requirements, we just use the mesh. So it's normally used by the IGB and IX. The last two APIs is just to extract the redirect table and how to bind the rings to the specific CPUs. Okay, now we move on to the second item. It's the direct input with the polling. So in the before this work in the DragonFlyBSD, when we processing our input packet, we will have to hold the network serializer. It's mainly for the stability of the network stack because when you bring in the NIC down, you will have to make sure there is no RX reception traffic goes through. So in this way, in order to avoid the deadlock of the serializer here, we will have to requeue the packet. As you can see, with, when the NIC receives the packet, we set it up and queue into a message port queue. And then set up a second mBuf and queue it here. Set up 3 mBuf and queue it here. Once everything on the NIC is processed, the NetSI is going to dequeue the buffer again. It tries to dequeue the mBuf1 and process it, dequeue the mBuf2 and process it, and dequeue the mBuf3 and process it. Well, as you can see, this causes a lot of cache refresh because when you set up the mBuf1, it's probably cache caught here. But when you dequeue it, it probably has go through a quite long path, like set up mBuf2, set up mBuf3, and release the RX log. So it causes the evasion of the L1 cache. And when you try to processing the mBuf1 for the network stack, for the example, Ethernet input handler, IP input handler, and for example, if you are doing forwarding, you then go through the forwarding path. You will have to refetch the mBuf1 from the main memory into, or from the L2 cache into the L1 cache. That's cost a lot. So with the direct input, there are several preconditions. First, the driver have to synchronize all the net ISRs at stop time, so we don't need to hold the RX ring serializer anymore. If we don't need to hold the serializer, then mBuf does not need to be requeued. We just process it in the network as in the network processing, like this one. If the network receives a packet, say M1, we just set it up and run the Ethernet input, IP input forward, and go to the IP2 and directly output here. So on this path, the L1 cache of the M1 is quite hot, so it saves a lot of CPU cycles. Here's the performance increment. It's around 10% here. For the fast forwarding, we reach 13 megapackets per second, and for the normal forwarding, we finally reach 11 megapackets per second. But it's only for the forwarding path, because for the HTTP workload, this direct input is not very meaningful. It's mainly because most of the processing time lies within the TCP input processing and then deliver it into the user space. So the L2 cache eviction and the reflection actually does not matters a lot to the whole performance. The third item is actually a pretty simple change. It's the KQ. I think everyone knows KQ. KQ has a data that reports the accept queue length to the user land. But let's take a look how it is used. Here is the example application NGX. It's about how they use the KQ. The KQ will return the length of the accept queue here, and the NGX tries to do the accept and set up the accepted sockets in a loop. It's based on the value that KQ has delivered to it. But the cost of this setup accepted socket is quite high. It's time consuming, and due to the work it has to do, it will destabilize and increase the request handling latency. So why not just change the backlog of the listen socket? It's mainly because if we set this listen socket backlog to a too low value, for example 32, you got excessive connection drops during the test. And if we set this to a relatively high value, say 256, then you got destabilized and increased the request handling latency. It's kind of like a dual-edged sword. So here's the solution. We just leave the backlog of the listen socket high, say 256, but we just try to limit the accept queue length reporting from the KQ. For example, we just set it to 32. This is a pretty simple change in the KQ code. And now here's the result. This final is the result that we measured if we set the KQ reporting accept queue length to 33 and leave the backlog of the listen queue to 256. And we got a tiny performance improvement here. We reached 217 kilo requests per second. And we got a drastic latency drop here. And also a latency deviation is further dropped. So it's a very simple change, but the effect is pretty good. So this change is not related to IP forwarding at all. It's because it's a KQ change. You know, IP forwarding don't use KQ at all. Next item is the sending aggregation from the network stack. As you may know, all high-performance drivers already have some mechanisms to reduce the TX ring doorbell writes. For example, it tries to dequeue several packets and put it on the TX ring, and then write the TX ring doorbell registers. Because the effect of the register writing is so bad, so the high-performance drivers all try to avoid the TX ring doorbell register writes. But the effectiveness of this driver optimization highly depends on how the network stack is going to feed the packets into the driver. This is especially important on the forwarding path. It's mainly because on the forwarding path you receive one packet and try to send the packet immediately to another driver. Most often, we do not see the driver queue gets anything more than one packet. So the driver's optimization here is effectively nullified by this type of the application. You just put a packet on the TX string and then try to write the TX doorbell registers, and well, that's pretty bad for the performance. On Dragonfly, we have a mechanism that all packets are sent. All packet sending are running in the net ISRs, so we have a context, control the context. We know when the sending completes or when we need to end the sending loop. Okay, this code segment is kind of not very clear. The basic logic is here: when the net ISR tries to send a packet, we just queue it onto the IFNet queue and then keep moving on. We do not even trigger the IFStart. And for our next packet, we just queue it here and do not trigger the IFStart. Once the net ISR have no more message to processing, we try to call a rollup API. The rollup API will try to call the network interface's IFStart. At this time, for this example, we at least have 2 packets to send here. So that means this makes the driver's aggregation mechanism more effective. Okay, here is the improvement. We have this deployed for, Dragonfly actually have this kind of sending aggregation deployed for quite some time. Before this change, we tried to set the aggregation limit to 4. That means 4 packets. If the driver queues 4 packets, then it tries to write the TX doorbell registers. This works absolutely fine for the 1 gigabit network, but on the 10 gigabit network, we will have to tune these parameters, increase this to 16, and we got around 400 kilo packets per second increment for both the fast forwarding and the normal forwarding. And well, as before, it has no impact on the HTTP workload. It's mainly because, as I have said, that everything is actually processed by the TCP input and TCP output. Most of the time consumption is there. Okay, here is the last item. The item is the per CPU IPFW states. This is the IPFW states table before. It is shared across all CPUs, but it has a link to the per CPU rules. Dragonfly has made the IPFW rule per CPU around 2008. So this table is actually protected by our RW lock, because we assume if the table is stable, the RW lock should work pretty well. Here is the preconditions for the per CPU IPFW states. First, UDP was RSS hash aware in 2014. That's a prerequisite for the per CPU IPFW states. And well, here's what I said. The RW locked IPFW states worked pretty well if the HTTP connection is kind of long-lived. For example, 16 requests per connections. But the RW locked IPFW states suffered quite a lot if the HTTP connection is quite short-lived. For example, 1 HTTP requests per connection. Here is what we do. Here's the per CPU states. We just put the states on the per CPU states table based on the RSS hash. Here is an example with 6 states, and on CPU 1 we don't have states at all, and on CPU 0 we have 3 states, and the last CPU contains 2 states. But how do we limit the number of states? Because every firewall has a limit on how many states it's going to hold. We just put per CPU counter first. The per CPU count is updated upon every state installed, but this one does not incur any memory contention because it's per CPU. Once this counter reaches certain level, we aggregate. These counters will be aggregated into a global counter. The global counter is updated using atomic operations, which is kind of costly. So on our fast path, you probably want to avoid any kinds of atomic operations if possible. This is the mechanism, counter updating mechanism that I have mentioned. It was originally developed for the snap allocator for the virtual memory systems. And here is the per-CPU count. It is updated and when state is installed, and the per-CPU count will be added to global counter. And once the global counter is checked against the limit, if it is reached the limit, then every per-CPU counter will be re-merged to see whether it is overflowed or not. Okay, here is the IPFW limit rules. It's a rule that keeps, let's say the rule will say, I only want to keep state for 10 connection from a specific IP. Once the IPFW state table made per CPU, I have revoked the tracking table. It's used to track the number of connections based on the rules. It's two-tier. The first tier is a globally locked table. It's used to hold the counter. Why we use a global locked table? It's mainly because the loose counter mechanism cannot work in this situation. Because normally you will specify a very low limit. For example, if you only want to accept 10 connections from a specified IP. So in this case, the loose counter update will not work because the limit is kind of too low. So we use a two-tier table. One is globally locked, and the second tier is per CPU. The second tier is used to lock up the rules that you try to create, and they all points to the counters here. Once a rule state is going to be installed, it will check with the counter, and after the counter directly, we will have to do this with the atomic operation. The reason is that I've said the limit is usually pretty low. But the lookup of the limit is actually lockless because we apply the two-tier. This tier is mainly for the lookup. So here is the performance improvement with the per CPU IPFW states. This one is the RW locked states table. It's only got like 43. The performance is 43 kilo per request per second. And here is the per CPU IPFW states. It's got 191 kilo requests per second, and this one is without the IPFW. As you can see, the latency is only increased a little bit, and also the latency standard deviation is also only increased a little bit. But with the RW locked state table, the performance is dropped almost like 25% of this one. And the latency is 3 times higher, and let alone the 99% percentile latency, it's just shoots you into the sky. This one is the experimental that we are currently doing. We try to implement the NAT, one style of the NAT that's redirect with the per CPU state table. Because most of the time that we found that after the redirection, the RSS hash of the packet is no longer being able to hold the states on the originate CPU. So we will have to dispatch the CPU to another one that matches the RSS hash of the NAT packet. This one still do not have the performance evaluation yet because I'm kind of lack of hardware currently. Okay, here is the last item. It's not related to the performance optimization, but related to the most recent 2 Intel vulnerability. One is the meltdown, and another is the spectra. These two do not affect IP forwarding performance because IP forwarding is mainly running all in the kernel. It only affects the performance of the HTTP workload. Okay, here's the data. I have measured several combinations of this meltdown and spectra workaround. Here is the base one. It lists the performance, the 99th percentile, and latency average standard deviation of the latency. Here is the one with the meltdown. Only the meltdown fix here. As you can see, the performance drop is not that bad, but the latency increasement also is not bad too. So the meltdown itself is, well, not worse as we can imagine, but now let's see the spectra. The spectra, usually, the spectra fix is, you will have to write to a special MSR upon every returning from the syscall. So as you can see, the performance drop is kind of drastic. You lost more than 30% of the performance, and the latency increment is like also 13%, and this aligns with the 99th percentile latency. The last one is meltdown and plus the spectrum. That means deploys all the fix up for the Intel vulnerability. The performance is kept dropping, but it's kind of aligned with the meltdown performance drop and kind of aligned with the latency increasement of the meltdown, as we have seen when meltdown is compared with the base system. Okay, I think that's all. Any questions? Okay, I would say there's no questions, right?
I have questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was very nice talk. Since I was from in the middle, so I'm sorry if it was already there. And so, do you have any data about scaling factor? So you saw the bunch of data using maybe 16 CPU cores, I think. But do you have any graphs like some x-axis, like number of CPU core, and y-axis throughput, for example?
Oh, no, I don't have a graph for that. It's just...
So the throughput is already quite high, like for coding it's almost close to 10 gigabit line rate, and for NGX it's like it's tens of kilo requests per second, right? So
here is the number for a relative compare number for 16 CPUs and the 24 CPUs. The green one is the orange one is actually for the 24 CPUs.
It
does not scale linearly, but here is the problem is was fixed later on. It's because the performance does not increase as much as we expected. Is mainly because we do not do direct input. The L1 cache eviction. It's mentioned in this paper. In this page, did you see this one?
Yeah, I was here, but
yes.
Maybe for this I need more time to understand.
Yes.
What's going on.
It's increased a bit, but not as much as we expect. That's why we tried to investigate what's happening and found out that the L1 cache eviction is pretty important for the forwarding application. As I've said, the L1 eviction and reflection does not affect the HTTP request performance at all.
So also in the NGX workload, so what is the request size and response size?
You mean this one?
Oh yeah. So you send HTTP GET and
it's HTTP
about say hundreds of bytes, I think 1 or 200 bytes.
1 kilobytes.
1 kilobyte.
I was seeing this is the configuration for the HTTP type.
1 kilobyte.
It's 1 kilobyte web object. It's I think a pretty small one. It's pretty small one. Anything smaller than this does not make any difference here, because it's the whole packet is around 1.3 kilobyte. Because it attached the HTTP header there, so it's still less than 1 Ethernet frame.
Okay, 1 kilobyte. But I think then the rate is already line rate, isn't it? Because it was
what?
So the throughput
was
already line rate, I think, isn't it? Because it was already hundreds of requests, no?
The performance?
Yeah.
No, the performance is kind of dropped here, but the latency is actually becoming more stable.
Yes. I understand that point.
Yes, at this time, for this graph, the CPU is wholly saturated.
Yeah.
So it's actually CPU bound because I'm using slower CPU.
It's not bottleneck.
Yeah, it's no longer bottleneck. I'm actually using relatively slow CPU. It's only 1.8 gigahertz, so it's kind of slower. But for this data, Linux actually acts better. It actually acts worse than us. So for this load, for this kind of workload, we far from saturating the line rate. It's because as far as I have observed, we only push around 2 gigabits per second here. It's because the web object is small. If you want to saturate the whole line, I have 2 gigabits line here. You will have to use 16 kilobytes web object for that.
How many concurrent connections?
Concurrent connection is around 30 kilo connections per second.
30 kilo connection.
One is 15 kilo connection. One is 15 kilo connection. They connected to 2 ports because I don't want to put a switch here. You don't know how well the switch can work for this kind of workload.
Yeah,
so.
I know literally.
Yeah, some switches are pretty bad, especially for the cheap ones.
I have millions of questions more, so let's talk later.
No. I just directly connected this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you show us roll-up API page again? Roll-up API.
Which one? The performance? This one? Oh, you mean the this
yes,
one?
yes.
Okay. It's if you want to do this for your operating system, there are some preconditions, especially this one. All packet sending are all running in the NetISRs because you have the controlled context. If you do something like FreeBSD or OtherBSD do, they will trigger some sending from the user space directly. It's from the user thread. You have no control over the user thread. You cannot detect when they stop sending. So this is the precondition for this roll-up mechanisms. But you can do something on the forwarding path because the forwarding path is usually controlled by you. It's triggered directly from the network driver in a reception thread, normally a task queue or interrupt thread. This way is just we input queue a packet to the output network NIC and then queue a packet there, but we don't call a driver's start. We just put it on a software queue. And then once everything, and once the NetISR thinks there is no more packets to processing, it tries to trigger the start. And then the driver will see 2 packets at least, for example, if you send 2 packets. Else you will just see, if you trigger the start directly here, the driver will see there is only 1 packet on the queue, and then put on the hardware queue and try to write the transmission doorbell register. The write to the register is the most cost thing on the transmission path. This is used to avoid writing to the transmission ring doorbell register for each packet.
I have a question.
Okay.
So, does roll-up API support IPsec or L2 or L3 tunnel protocol?
Yeah, it's the same. All network sending runs in the network ISRs. So there's no exceptions. Okay, any questions? All right, I think that's all. Thank you, everybody.